The music didn't stop when it happened. It merely faltered, a violin string quivering mid-note, as if even the instruments had to catch their breath. Under the gold chandeliers of the Fairmont Copley Ballroom, my glasses left my face and shattered against the marble like a small explosion of stars. For a heartbeat, all I saw were fragments of glass of my son's face, of the woman he'd just married. My name is Aurora Hughes, and I'm 68 years old. I have spent my life loving, quietly saving, quietly surviving, quietly. Tonight, quiet was over. Juliet's hand still hung in the air, the imprint of her palm blazing across my cheek. Her wedding dress clung to her like a bright white lie. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she said, voice sugar-slick and sharp enough to cut. "A woman your age doesn't need that much space. Give me the keys." It wasn't only the words, it was the way she said them, like an order to a servant. Like I was a door she could kick in. A rustle moved through the crowd, a collective shift of pearls and tuxedos. I knelt to collect the broken lenses, the world bending and doubling around me. No one helped. A few guests looked away as if my shame were a stain that might spread to their cuffs. Someone whispered, "Poor thing." Another, "Well, she is alone." And then the worst truth in the room, my son didn't move. Ethan stood a few steps behind, his bright eyes fixed on the floor, jaw clenched as if holding a secret he could no longer swallow. I searched his face for the boy who used to run back to kiss me if he forgot, who once saved his allowance to buy me a sweater on Mother's Day. The boy was gone. In his place stood a man who had decided that silence was easier than honor. I rose slowly. All those years of being small on purpose so others could stand taller buckled and then broke inside me like a dam. I felt the heat of humiliation drain away, replaced by something clean and cold, a clarity, a line in the sand. "Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better," Juliet went on, smoothing the silk at her hip, turning to give the photographer a practiced profile. "We need our privacy. You're not welcome there anymore." The chandeliers blurred. I blinked and the blur cleared. I saw everything too clearly. Juliet's parents at the head table, pretending not to hear her friends smirking into their champagne flutes, Ethan's best man, shifting half a step forward, then back, choosing not to be brave. I saw myself as they saw me. Thin shoulders, discount aisle dress, the old sedan key fob sticking from a worn leather purse. They thought they had measured me. They thought they knew my size. "Give me the keys," Aurora, Juliet repeated, quiet now, for me alone. Do the right thing for once. As if I had not been doing the right thing when I stayed up nights with Ethan's fevers, when I sold my wedding ring to keep him in college one semester longer, when I took the part-time job at the flower shop after Robert died, because grief needs structure and cash needs inflow. As if sacrifice didn't have my handwriting all over it. Something steadied in me. I slipped my purse strap over my shoulder. "No," I said, and the word landed with the soft weight of a gavel. Juliet blinked, thrown by the simplicity. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated, my voice calm, almost gentle. "You will not have my keys. Not tonight. Not ever." The room seemed to lean closer. A waiter froze mid-pour. The pianist's hand stalled above the keys. In the hush, I felt Robert beside me, his laugh like warm bread, his old promise in my ear. Visible wealth draws trouble. Invisible strength keeps you safe. I had kept us safe for years. Maybe too safe. Maybe safe had taught people like Juliet to think I was weak. I turned to go. "Where are you going?" Ethan asked, finally speaking. The color drained from his face. I looked at my son, and for a flicker, grief tried to claim me. Then I inhaled, and the grief burned down to something harder. "I'm going to make a phone call," I said. "The kind you make when lines are crossed." I walked out past the gold doors and down the hallway where roses perfumed the air, and the carpet hushed my steps. In the vestibule, beneath a portrait of people who would never know my name, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had memorized long ago and prayed I'd never need. "Carlos," I said when he answered. "It's time. Are you sure, Mrs. Hughes?" His voice was steady, the way bridges are steady before you set foot on them. There's no going back from this. 30 minutes, I said. Bring the documents. I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark pane of glass. The woman looking back wasn't fragile. She wasn't poor. She wasn't alone. She was done being quiet. Behind me, laughter rose and then faltered. Somewhere, a toast clinked thinly against crystal. I slipped the phone into my purse and stepped toward the doors again, the cold air of the corridor brushing my burning cheek, cooling it to steel. Tonight, they would meet the real me. If you've ever had to choose dignity over family peace, this story is for you. Like share and follow to stay with me, the mask comes off, and the truth walks into the ballroom. The city lights bled through the rain as I drove home that night, the wipers scraping rhythmically against the windshield. Boston was half asleep, but my mind was wide awake, every heartbeat replaying the moment Juliet's hand met my face. The sting had faded, but the humiliation hadn't. That wasn't what hurt the most, though. What hollowed me out was the stillness in my son's eyes, the quiet betrayal of a child who once promised he'd always protect me. My apartment greeted me with silence. The familiar creak of the floorboard near the hallway, the faint scent of lavender from the candle. I'd forgotten to blow out earlier that day. Everything felt suddenly too small, too fragile, as if my entire life had been made of glass. I hung up my coat, kicked off my shoes, and stood for a long while just breathing in the ordinary peace that now felt like a stranger. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when this home had laughter echoing through it. When Robert would come back from his trips smelling faintly of sea air and salt, his hands still cold from the docks. Simple life, happy life, he used to say, kissing my forehead as I stirred dinner on the stove. But what no one knew, not our neighbors, not even our son, was that Robert's quiet import business had made us wealthier than we ever let on. He was clever with investments, cautious with money, and allergic to showing off. Rich people attract scavengers, he'd laugh. Let's keep our blessings invisible. And we did. For decades, we lived like ordinary people. I worked part-time at a flower shop because I loved the smell of fresh lilies. Robert drove a modest sedan. We vacationed in cabins, not villas. No one ever guessed that the Hughes couple could have bought half the street if we'd wanted to. When Robert died, I promised him I'd keep our secret. "Don't let greed find its way to our family," were his last words to me. I thought he was just being cautious. I didn't realize he was warning me about our own son. The first time I met Juliet, I sensed trouble. Ethan had brought her over on a spring afternoon, beaming like a man who'd found heaven itself. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. But her beauty came with edges, the kind that sliced rather than shone. I remember her eyes scanning my living room like a real estate agent's, the worn sofa, the bookshelves that sagged under old novels, the lace curtains Robert loved. How cozy, she'd said, and even then I could hear the unspoken word behind it, pathetic. I'd spent that entire dinner pretending not to notice the way she whispered to Ethan, the way she asked about my pension, with a tone that belonged to a banker. "You must be so proud raising him all on your own," she said, smiling too hard. "Do you manage all the bills yourself? That must be tough at your age." I had smiled back, polite, gentle. "Oh, I manage just fine." Inside, though, a chill crept up my spine. From that night forward, every visit from her was a slow extraction, a little more of my dignity pulled loose each time. Comments about my car, my clothes, the way I still worked when I should be relaxing. But beneath the condescension, I could feel her watching me, calculating something. The apartment was the prize, I realized. Not me, not Ethan, the property. And Ethan, my sweet boy, was drifting further into her gravity. I'd see it in small things, the way his tone changed when he spoke to me, the subtle defensiveness when I mentioned Juliet. He was no longer my son, not completely. He was her echo. That winter, I found out just how deep their problems ran. It was a cold night when I got a call from the landlord of their rental apartment. He sounded nervous. "Mrs. Hughes, I don't mean to intrude, but I'm afraid your son's rent payment is late again." "Late?" I asked, stunned. Ethan had told me everything was fine. 3 months late, the landlord said quietly. "He mentioned you'd cover it." I didn't let my voice shake. "Yes, of course. Send me the invoice." That night I transferred the money and sat in the dark for a long time staring at the old family photo on the wall. Robert, Ethan, and me frozen in a simpler time. I had already started saving Ethan without realizing it. Month after month, I'd cover his temporary setbacks, a credit card here, a car payment there. He'd thank me once, twice, and then stop altogether. Gratitude became expectation. Juliet knew. I saw it in her smirk when she'd come by for dinner. One evening she leaned back in her chair and said, "You're such a generous woman, Aurora. I hope Ethan inherited that from you." She meant useful. I smiled. I hope he inherited my memory instead. That night I opened Robert's old safe. Inside were the deeds, the certificates, the quietly growing investments. I touched them not with pride, but with the sorrow of someone realizing she might soon need her own armor. Because deep down, I knew what was coming. Juliet's hunger wasn't for love, it was for ownership. And Ethan, my Ethan, was about to let her devour everything we built. When I finally fell asleep near dawn, one thought followed me into dreams. They think I'm weak because I live simply, but the quiet ones always know where the power lies. It began with small things, tiny fractures that only someone who loved too deeply would notice. A late reply to my texts, a canceled dinner, Ethan saying he was too busy with work when I knew he just didn't want Juliet to be uncomfortable around me. Every excuse was a brick in the wall rising between us, built so quietly that I didn't realize I was already on the other side. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was a Sunday, bright and cold, the kind of Boston winter day when sunlight pretends to be warmth. Ethan had brought Juliet over for lunch. I had made her favorite lemon chicken roasted potatoes, fresh bread. I'd set the table with the good china, the one Robert and I had bought for our 25th anniversary. But instead of gratitude, Juliet's first words were a complaint. "This building doesn't have an elevator," she asked, glancing at her shoes as if the stairs were an insult. "It's only 2 flights," I said softly, but she was already brushing past me, examining the walls, the furniture, the view from the balcony like a buyer at an open house. "Such a waste of space," she murmured half to herself. "It's too much for one person." Ethan gave me a look that I knew too well, half apology, half embarrassment. But he said nothing. At lunch, Juliet smiled through polite small talk, sipping her wine as if waiting for the right moment. And then it came. "You know, Aurora," she began, "we've been looking for a place to settle after the wedding. Ethan told me your apartment is in a great area. Maybe when you move to a senior community we could—" I didn't let her finish. "A senior community," I repeated, careful to keep my voice even. I hadn't planned on leaving my home. Her smile was all teeth. "Oh, I just meant eventually. You're so independent now, but what if something happens you shouldn't have to live alone?" Robert's voice echoed in my head. Greed never comes shouting. It knocked softly, smiling at the door. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The scent of lemon and rosemary clung to the air, but the room felt empty. I thought of all the years I had spent teaching Ethan that honesty mattered more than wealth, that love should never come with conditions. Somewhere along the way, I had failed to teach him that lesson deeply enough. A few weeks later, I decided to learn the truth for myself. I called Amelia, an old friend from church who worked in real estate. "Can you find out what kind of financial shape Ethan and Juliet are in?" I asked quietly. "I have a bad feeling." When she called back 3 days later, her voice was grave. "Aurora, you were right. They're drowning. Credit cards maxed out, behind on rent car loans, in default. Juliet's been using her mother's name to apply for more credit. It's a mess." The air left my lungs. My hands trembled around the phone. How much debt? Over 100,000 at least. And that's not counting the wedding. For a moment, the world tilted. The boy I raised, the one who used to give me flowers from the backyard just because he thought they were pretty, was now borrowing money he could never repay. And the woman he loved had turned my home into a solution. That night, I walked through every room of my apartment, touching the walls, the photographs, the things that carried a life's worth of memories. The sofa, where Robert had fallen asleep reading. The kitchen counter, where Ethan had done his homework as a child. The balcony where I used to sit with my husband, watching the city lights shimmer across the Charles River. How had all of that, our story, our life, become just square footage to them? Juliet's calls grew more frequent after that. She'd speak in a syrupy voice that barely concealed her intent. "Aurora, have you seen those new retirement condos near Beacon Hill? They're wonderful, so modern, so safe." I'd answer calmly, "No, Juliet, I'm comfortable here." "Well, just think about it. You shouldn't be alone at your age. Every conversation ended the same way, with her pretending to care and me pretending to believe her. But one afternoon, when she thought I wasn't home, Juliet showed up at my building with a man carrying a briefcase. My neighbor Joseph saw them from his balcony. The man was measuring the exterior walls, jotting down notes. Aurora, Joseph said later that evening, she brought an appraiser. They left when they noticed me watching. That was the moment I stopped doubting myself. The next morning, I went to the small safe hidden in my bedroom closet. Inside were the property titles, bank certificates, and investment records Robert and I had guarded for decades. I sat on the floor, papers spread around me, the early light spilling through the curtains. I realized how much power I'd given away, disguised as generosity wrapped in love. Later that week, I met Carlos, my financial advisor, at a quiet cafe. He was a calm man, gray-haired, always dressed neatly, with eyes that had seen too many family feuds. "Mrs. Hughes," he said gently, "are you ready to stop hiding?" "Yes," I answered. "But not yet. I need them to show me exactly how far they're willing to go." He nodded, sliding a folder toward me. "When you're ready, call me. Everything's prepared." As I drove home, the city looked different, sharper, colder, stripped of illusion. I parked my car, stepped into my apartment, and for the first time in years, I locked the door behind me and whispered to the empty room, "Let them try." Outside, the wind pressed against the windows. Somewhere in the echo of the city, I heard Robert's voice again, steady, wise, and proud. "You've been quiet long enough, Aurora." The invitation came under the guise of a family dinner. Juliet's voice over the phone had sounded syrupy, rehearsed. "Aurora, we'd really love to talk. It's important about the future." I almost said no, but curiosity and maybe a flicker of hope won out. I still wanted to believe my son hadn't completely turned into someone I didn't recognize. That Saturday evening, I put on a simple blue dress and took the bus across town. When I arrived at Juliet's parents' house, the air was heavy with expensive perfume and quiet hostility. The dining room was perfect white roses on the table, wine glasses glinting, polite smiles concealing sharper edges. Juliet's father, a man with a banker's voice and politician's smile, greeted me first. "Mrs. Hughes," he said, shaking my hand too firmly. "We're so happy you could join us. Please sit down." Ethan stood near the window, his shoulders tense. He didn't meet my eyes. Juliet, glowing in her tailored dress, came over and kissed my cheek, like a diplomat greeting an opponent before negotiations. It wasn't a dinner. It was an ambush dressed in porcelain and politeness. We'd barely touched our food before Juliet's mother began. "Aurora, dear," she said in that tone people reserve for small children and the elderly, "we wanted to have an open conversation about your well-being." "My well-being?" I asked, setting down my fork. "Yes," her husband continued, folding his napkin with care. "Juliet and Ethan are concerned about you living alone in such a large apartment. At your age, it's risky. What if you fall? What if something happens?" I looked at Ethan, waiting for him to stop them, to say, "Mom's fine," but he only sighed and nodded like a man who'd already agreed to the terms. Juliet leaned forward, her smile perfectly measured. "We found a wonderful senior community in Brookline, safe, clean, full of social activities. You'd love it." My chest tightened. "And what happens to my apartment?" Juliet didn't flinch. "Well, it would make sense to sell it. The money could cover your new place for years and, of course, help Ethan and me start our married life." There it was, the truth they had dressed up as concern. "Juliet," I said quietly, "you're asking me to sell my home. I'm asking you to make a responsible decision," she replied, still smiling. "It's not just about you. It's about what's best for all of us." Ethan finally spoke, his voice flat. "Mom, it's logical. You don't need that much space. Juliet and I are starting a family soon. It would be better if I cut him off. Better for whom, Ethan? For your comfort, for your bank account." The room went still. The clock ticked once, twice. Juliet's father cleared his throat. "No one is trying to pressure you, Mrs. Hughes. We simply believe it's time to plan responsibly. If you refuse, well..." He hesitated, exchanging a glance with his wife. "There are legal ways to ensure your safety should your decision-making become compromised." The words hit me like a slap. "Legal ways," I repeated. Juliet's mother smiled, too calm. "You know, sometimes when people get older, they don't see what's best for them. It's not uncommon for families to help through guardianship or financial management." They were threatening me. Sitting in a beautiful dining room eating roasted salmon off fine china, they were plotting to take my life apart. I turned to Ethan, my voice trembling. "You're sitting there listening to strangers tell me they'll take control of my life. And you agree?" His jaw tightened. "Mom, don't make this dramatic. We're just trying to help you. We can't watch you make bad choices forever." The words broke something inside me. Not because they were cruel, but because they were spoken with the calm confidence of someone who believed them. My son truly thought I was the problem. I set my napkin on the table, my hands steady, even as my heart cracked open. "Juliet," I said softly, "you've always underestimated me. You see an old woman with a small pension and no fight left in her. You see weakness because you've never lived a day without safety. But you forget everything you admire about Ethan came from me." Juliet's smile faltered for the first time. "What are you talking about?" I rose slowly. "You'll find out soon enough." I looked at Ethan one last time. "You were my pride," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "And tonight you became my greatest regret." The drive home was silent. I didn't cry this time. The tears had burned themselves out long ago, replaced by a cold certainty that pulsed beneath my ribs. When I reached my apartment, the city outside was alive with lights. I stood at my window, staring down at the streets Robert and I had once walked hand in hand. His words echoed in my mind like a promise I had forgotten to keep. "Don't let anyone take what we built." I went to my desk, unlocked the drawer, and took out Carlos's card. My fingers didn't shake as I dialed. He answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Hughes, Carlos," I said, my voice low but firm. "Prepare the documents, every single one of them." He hesitated. "Is it time?" "It's time," I whispered. "They wanted to play with my life. Let's show them who they're dealing with." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't fear. It was resolve. Cold, sharp, unstoppable. The night of the wedding shimmered with false perfection. The ballroom at the Royal Oaks Hotel was drenched in gold light and white roses, every table a promise of beauty that hid the rot beneath. Juliet had gotten everything she wanted: crystal chandeliers, imported champagne, a dress that sparkled like deceit itself. I watched from a corner table alone, as if I were just another guest, and not the woman who had paid for more of this spectacle than anyone realized. My son stood at the altar, handsome but hollow-eyed. The boy who once laughed freely now moved like a man trapped in the story someone else had written for him. Juliet, radiant and ruthless, wore her victory like a crown. She had won. Or so she believed. As the ceremony ended, applause erupted. I clapped too, my palms cold and steady. I had made a decision weeks ago, one that had kept me awake every night since the family dinner. I would let this wedding happen not as a blessing, but as a mirror. They would see themselves for what they had become. The reception began a blur of music, champagne, and laughter that felt forced. People danced, toasted, and complimented Juliet's beauty, pretending not to notice the tension that pulsed beneath the celebration. I stayed quiet, offering small smiles, playing my role as the modest, harmless mother of the groom. The woman everyone pitied. The woman they thought was powerless. At exactly 9:00 p.m., I slipped away from the crowd and stepped outside. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of rain. In the distance, thunder rumbled faintly, like the world itself was holding its breath. I walked across the parking lot to my old sedan and sat behind the wheel. The glow from the ballroom windows flickered against the windshield. Inside that glittering room, my son and his new wife were celebrating a future built on my humiliation, and I was about to end it. I reached into my purse and took out my phone. "Carlos," I said when he answered, my voice steady. "It's Aurora. Bring the documents. It's time." He didn't ask for confirmation. He already knew. 30 minutes, he replied. "Are you sure you want to do this tonight?" I've never been more sure of anything I said. When I hung up, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from release. I looked down at the keychain Robert had given me years ago, its brass charm worn smooth with time. "Invisible wealth gives you power," he used to say. He had been right. I had hidden our fortune for decades thinking it would protect our family. I never imagined it would become the weapon I'd use to defend myself from them. As I waited for Carlos, memories came rushing back, the soft laughter of my husband, the tiny apartment where we first started, the smell of sea salt in his hair. Robert had always said our greatest mistake would be to raise a child who valued money more than people. Somewhere along the way, I had done exactly that. Through the car window, I could see guests mingling on the terrace. Juliet was surrounded by friends, all smiles and glitter. Ethan stood beside her, his hand on her back like an accessory. He looked smaller somehow, reduced by the weight of his own choices. 15 minutes passed. The rain began to fall light at first, then harder. The droplets slid down the windshield like tiny glass tears. I watched the ballroom lights blur into streaks of gold and white. I thought of how easily beauty disguises cruelty. My phone buzzed again. It was Carlos. "I'm here," he said simply. I stepped out of the car, the rain cold against my skin. Carlos's black sedan pulled up beside mine, its headlights slicing through the dark. He emerged holding a leather folder under his arm, his umbrella sheltering him from the storm. "Mrs. Hughes," he said, his voice low, respectful. "I brought everything. Once we sign, there's no undoing it." "Perfect," I said. "Let's finish this." We stood under the awning, the rain drumming a steady rhythm around us. He opened the folder and handed me each document. The first was the termination of every financial guarantee I had ever made for Ethan. The second was a legal notice freezing all monthly transfers I had been secretly making to cover his debts. The third, a signed declaration amending my will. I signed them one by one, my signature deliberate and final. For years I said quietly I paid for their mistakes. I told myself it was love. But love without respect is just servitude. Carlos nodded. "You're doing the right thing, Aurora. They need to learn that lesson." When he left to make the necessary calls, I stayed there alone under the rain, the thunder rolling closer now. The sky cracked open above me, and lightning illuminated the ballroom windows. I could see silhouettes inside, Juliet laughing, Ethan raising a glass. I wondered if they had any idea how fragile their perfect world truly was. I got back in my car, the signed documents beside me. Every raindrop on the windshield seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I wasn't the quiet widow anymore. I wasn't the invisible mother. 30 minutes from now, the truth would walk through those doors with me. And when it did, the masks would fall and everything they had built on lies and greed would crumble beautifully, inevitably, completely. The ballroom doors swung open with a hush so heavy it swallowed the music whole. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The laughter froze mid-air. I stepped inside, the rain still clinging to my hair, droplets glimmering like tiny shards of glass beneath the chandeliers. Beside me was Carlos, immaculate in his dark suit, his briefcase tucked neatly under one arm, the messenger of consequences. Every eye turned to us. Some faces lit with curiosity, others with mild irritation that their perfect evening might be interrupted. At the far end of the room, Juliet stood at the center of the dance floor, radiant in her gown, framed by the flash of photographers. Ethan was next to her, champagne glass in hand. He froze when he saw me. "Mom," he said, a strained smile breaking across his face. "What are you doing here? You already—" But Juliet's voice cut through his. "You left once, Aurora. Why come back, trying to steal the spotlight?" Her laughter was sharp and hollow. I saw her friends whispering behind manicured hands, amused and cruel, waiting for me to wilt like an unwanted guest. But I didn't wilt. I walked forward each step, measured the sound of my heels echoing through the silence. Carlos followed me to the center of the room. His professional calm filled the space like static before a storm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone smooth and commanding. "I apologize for interrupting. My name is Carlos Jones. I represent Mrs. Aurora Hughes in all legal and financial matters. I am here to deliver certain documents to Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Dawson Hughes that concern immediate changes to their financial standing." A ripple moved through the crowd. People exchanged glances, murmuring. The words, "financial standing," always carried a scent of scandal. Ethan's expression faltered. "Carlos, what are you talking about?" Juliet's face tightened. "This is ridiculous. You're making a scene." Carlos opened his folder, the sound of the clasp snapping like the first strike of lightning before a storm. "Mr. Hughes," he said, clearly effective immediately, "all financial guarantees provided by your mother, including your lease agreement and monthly bank transfers, have been canceled. Your accounts will reflect these changes within the hour." Ethan blinked. What guarantees?" I looked at him then, directly for the first time in months. "The ones that kept you from drowning," I said, softly. Juliet turned to me, her voice rising, her mask cracking. "That's absurd. She doesn't have any money. Look at her. She drives a car older than I am." "Appearances can be deceiving," Carlos replied. "For 3 years, Mrs. Hughes has made monthly transfers totaling $162,000 to cover your debts, rent, credit cards, car payments, even this wedding's deposit." A collective gasp rolled through the room. Some guests turned to Juliet, others to Ethan, eyes wide with fascination. The air buzzed with the kind of excitement only a public downfall can create. Ethan's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. "Mom! You paid for all this, for everything I said, and in return I was rewarded with a slap." The silence that followed was suffocating. Juliet's painted smile vanished completely, leaving behind only panic. "You're lying," she said, but her voice trembled. "She's lying, Ethan. Tell them she's lying." Carlos continued, relentless. "Furthermore, the payment guarantee for tonight's event has been withdrawn. The venue management will expect immediate payment before guests are permitted to leave." The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, the uneasy shuffle of expensive shoes on marble. The hotel manager standing near the door looked visibly alarmed. Juliet's father rose from his table, his face pale. "Mrs. Hughes," he said quickly, "perhaps this isn't the time." "No," I interrupted, my voice clear and firm. "This is exactly the time." I turned to the crowd, 130 faces staring, waiting. For years I lived quietly. I let people think I was fragile, simple, harmless. I wore humility like armor. But tonight, that ends. I faced Juliet, whose breath now came in shallow bursts. "You thought you could humiliate me, manipulate my son, and take what was mine. You mistook kindness for weakness. That's a mistake you'll remember for the rest of your life." Juliet's mascara had begun to run the black trails smudging down her cheeks. Ethan stood motionless beside her, his face ashen. "Mom," he said finally, his voice breaking, "I didn't know it was like this." "Yes, you did," I said quietly. "You just didn't want to see it." Carlos closed his folder and addressed them both one last time. "Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, all legal arrangements have been updated. Your mother's estate, which you assumed you would inherit, will now be directed toward the newly established Aurora Hughes Foundation, an organization dedicated to protecting seniors from family exploitation." The words landed like thunder. Juliet swayed on her feet. Ethan's lips parted, but no sound came out. Around them, whispers turned into a low hum of shock and disbelief. "Mom, please," Ethan whispered, reaching out as if he could still reach the woman he had once known. "Don't do this. We can fix it. I'll make it right." I stepped back out of his reach. "The time to make it right was before you let her slap me," I said. before you turned love into leverage. For a moment, I thought he might fall to his knees. Instead, he simply stood there, eyes glistening, the reality of loss finally cutting through the fog of entitlement. The rain beat harder against the windows. Inside, the music had stopped completely. Guests began to slip quietly toward the exits, murmuring condolences they didn't mean. Juliet sank into a chair, her wedding gown collapsing around her like a dying flower. I turned to leave my heels echoing in the silence. Behind me, I heard Ethan whisper her name, but Juliet didn't respond. The only sound that followed me out was the quiet drip of rain from the ceiling chandeliers, a steady rhythm marking the end of a charade. By the time I stepped into the storm outside, I no longer felt the cold. Something had broken, and something far stronger had taken its place. 3 days after the wedding, the city had returned to its usual rhythm, but my apartment remained steeped in silence. Not the peaceful kind I used to cherish, but the kind that hums with unfinished echoes of words of betrayal, of everything left behind on that ballroom floor. The newspapers hadn't covered it, but gossip traveled faster than truth ever could. By the second day, every person who'd attended that wedding had retold the story in their own version: the slap, the revelation, the canceled payment, the humiliation. It was the kind of scandal that clung to people like perfume, too potent to wash off. The phone had been ringing since dawn. I hadn't answered a single call. Ethan's voice filled the machine with messages that began with anger and ended with desperation. "Mom, what were you thinking? You ruined everything." Then, hours later, "Please, we can talk about this. I didn't mean for things to go that far." And finally, quieter, "I'm sorry. I don't know what to do." Juliet's messages were different, shrill, accusatory venom laced with fear. "You think you've won, old woman? You won't get away with this," followed by, "You destroyed my life," and then a dozen missed calls with no words at all, just silence and breathing. I sat by the window, the late afternoon light slanting across the floor, illuminating the dust that floated lazily through the air. The same apartment Juliet had called too big for a woman your age now felt like a fortress, a place that had seen too much, yet still stood. Joseph came by with a box of pastries from the bakery down the street. "You haven't been eating," he said, setting them on the kitchen counter. "You need to keep your strength." I smiled faintly. "You sound like Robert." He poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs and sat across from me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "You know they're not going to stop, right? I know. They'll come after you again. People like that, they don't learn until they've lost everything." I stared into my coffee, watching the ripples tremble against the sides, then let them lose it. That night, as I prepared for bed, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman who looked back wasn't the same one who had walked into that ballroom. Her eyes were older, yes, but sharper too. There was no fragility left in her face, only resolve. By morning, Carlos had arrived with updates. He carried a neat folder as always, but his expression held something heavier than paperwork. "Mrs. Hughes," he said, sitting across from me, "I think you should know that Ethan and Juliet have both contacted attorneys." I didn't flinch. "For what purpose?" "To claim you're unfit to manage your affairs," he said carefully. "They've begun telling people you've become unstable since Robert passed, that the scene at the wedding was a breakdown." A slow, tired smile touched my lips. "So that's their new strategy?" Carlos nodded grimly. "They'll try to have you declared mentally incompetent. It's rare, but not unheard of, especially when greed is involved." The words should have frightened me, but instead they brought an odd calm. I had seen this coming in some form or another. I'd lived too long not to recognize how desperation makes people monstrous. "I'm prepared," I said finally. "They can't take what I've built. Not again." Still, after he left, the weight of it settled on me. To have your own child plotting to strip you of your autonomy, it's a grief unlike any other. Not the grief of death, but of recognition the moment you realize the person you raised has been replaced by someone else entirely. That evening, Lucy knocked on my door. My niece, always gentle, always direct, stood there holding a grocery bag and wearing a worried expression. "Aunt Aurora," she said softly. "I heard what they're trying to do. I came as soon as I found out. I let her in, and for the first time in days I felt something warm fill the air again." She unpacked vegetables, bread, and tea as if she were reclaiming the space from ghosts. "You're not alone," she said, glancing up at me. "They might have money problems, but you have something stronger, truth, and people who believe in you." Her words were simple, but they reached deeper than comfort. They felt like roots growing back into the soil after a storm. Later that night, I stood on my balcony, watching the lights of the city shimmer across the river. I could almost hear Robert's voice again, calm and steady. "You can't save people who don't want saving, Aurora." The wind brushed against my hair, carrying the faint sound of sirens far below. Somewhere out there, Ethan and Juliet were probably fighting, panicking, unraveling under the weight of their own choices. I didn't feel satisfaction, only inevitability. Inside, the phone rang again. I didn't answer. But this time, I didn't unplug it either. I simply let it ring until it stopped. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clean. Before I went to sleep, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the brown folder Joseph had retrieved for me the night of the wedding. Inside were the titles, bank statements, and one more thing, a handwritten letter from Robert tucked between two old certificates. I had read it countless times, but tonight it felt new again. If the world ever turns against you, don't fight it with fear. Fight it with truth. Let the truth be the weapon, and it will never fail you. I placed the letter back in the folder and turned off the light. Outside, the city breathed on, unaware of the quiet war still unfolding behind my closed door. But I knew this much: the battle wasn't about money anymore. It was about dignity. And that was something no one, not even my son, could ever take from me again. A week passed before the storm truly broke. I was watering the plants on my balcony one quiet morning when Carlos called. His tone was clipped professional, but beneath the surface I heard urgency. "Aurora," he said, "it's begun. Ethan filed a preliminary petition with the court this morning. He's claiming you're no longer mentally fit to handle your finances." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The watering can slipped slightly in my hand, spilling over the geraniums. "He actually did it?" I whispered. "My own son." Carlos sighed on the other end of the line. "He's alleging erratic behavior, emotional instability, and irrational decisions, using the wedding incident as evidence. They've even gathered witness statements from some guests who were there." The words hit me harder than any slap ever could. So that was their plan B. When manipulation failed, they turned to destruction. "Do I have a copy of the petition?" I asked. "I'll bring it by this afternoon," he said. "And Aurora, it's ugly, but we can fight this." After hanging up, I stood there frozen, the morning sun burning against my back. Across the street, the neighborhood kids were playing hopscotch, their laughter floating up to my balcony. Life went on as if nothing had changed. But for me, something irreparable had fractured. By the time Carlos arrived, I had already brewed coffee and composed myself. He laid the documents on my kitchen table, each page heavy with betrayal. My name, my age, my address, all neatly typed beneath cold legal terms: incompetent, unfit, unstable. It was surreal reading words that tried to erase me. "They've included sworn statements," Carlos said, "from guests who described your actions that night as erratic, impulsive, even vindictive." "Sworn statements," I muttered, scanning the pages, "from people who didn't know a single truth behind that night." Carlos nodded gravely. "Juliet's parents have also added their voices. It's clear this was coordinated." I closed the folder and stared out the window, my thoughts a storm of disbelief and resolve. "If they want a war, they'll have one," I said quietly, "but it will be fought on my terms." That evening, Lucy came over with Amelia, the same real estate agent who had once helped me uncover Juliet's debts. Amelia placed another folder on the table, her face pale but determined. "Aurora, you need to see this," she said. "I've been digging deeper into Juliet's activities. Inside were emails, receipts, and copies of legal consultations. She's been meeting with elder law attorneys for months," Amelia explained. "Even before the wedding. This was planned well in advance. They were preparing to take control of your estate no matter what you did." The room went silent. Joseph, who had joined us after hearing the news, clenched his jaw. "That woman is pure poison," he muttered. "And your son let her lead him straight into the pit." I exhaled slowly, pushing the anger aside. "Then we'll use their own ambition against them." Carlos looked at me curiously. "What do you have in mind?" "I want every document ready," I said. "Every bank statement, every property title, every record proving my financial decisions were rational, deliberate, and sound. I also want a record of every payment I made on Ethan's behalf. If they want to question my competence, let them first see how much of their life I paid for." Carlos smiled faintly. "You sound more composed than most of my clients in less dire situations." I met his gaze steadily. "Because this isn't just about me. It's about every parent who's been manipulated, every mother who's been told she's too old to think for herself." Over the next few days, my apartment turned into a war room. Files spread across the dining table, witnesses coordinated, evidence cataloged. Lucy helped organize old correspondence and photos, while Joseph handled contacts who had witnessed Juliet's humiliations and manipulations. Amelia worked tirelessly tracing the money trails that proved the couple's mounting debts. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a campaign. A deliberate, strategic effort to erase me and rewrite my life in their image. By the end of the week, Carlos returned with news. "We've filed a counterpetition," he said, his eyes gleaming with restrained satisfaction. "Not only are we defending against their claim of incompetence, but we're filing a civil suit for attempted coercion, defamation, and elder abuse." The words felt powerful, like armor. "Elder abuse," I repeated. I never thought I'd hear that term applied to my own child. Carlos placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone, Aurora. Most of my clients never do until it's too late. But you acted in time." That night, after everyone left, I stood on my balcony once again, the city lights flickering like distant stars. The fear that had once gnawed at me was gone, replaced by something sharper purpose. Juliet had tried to strip me of everything: my home, my autonomy, my dignity. But in doing so, she had given me something unexpected: clarity. I finally saw who I was without the masks of motherhood or sacrifice. I was not a frail old woman clinging to the past. I was Aurora Hughes, a survivor, a strategist, and a woman who had spent her entire life protecting others. Now, it was time to protect herself. Below, the streetlights shimmered across wet asphalt as the first drops of rain began to fall. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. The war had begun. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. 6 months later, the courtrooms smelled of old wood and cold determination. The air was thick with silence, the kind that comes before a verdict or before a storm. I sat beside Carlos at the defendant's table, hands folded neatly in my lap. My lawyer's notes lay untouched before me. I didn't need to read them. Every word of my truth was already etched into my bones. Across the room sat Ethan and Juliet. They looked nothing like the golden couple I once knew. Ethan's face had grown gaunt, his expensive suit hanging on him as if it belonged to someone else. Juliet, still beautiful but visibly worn, avoided my eyes. Even now, she clung to an image of control, her hair pinned too tightly, her expression too composed to be real. The judge entered, and everyone stood. My heart was steady, not from calm, but from acceptance. Whatever happened today, I had already reclaimed what mattered most: my dignity. The proceedings began with Juliet's attorney. His voice droned through rehearsed accusations that I had suffered a psychological break at the wedding, that my finances had become erratic, that I was a danger to my own estate. He even played a clip from the ballroom, edited to show me raising my voice, omitting the slap that started it all. When the video ended, I could feel the whispers ripple through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. Carlos leaned in his voice, a low murmur. "Don't react. Let them bury themselves with half-truths." Then came our turn. My attorney rose calm and methodical and handed the judge a thick folder. "Your Honor," she said, "these are documented financial records proving Mrs. Hughes' consistent decision-making for over a decade. You'll also find evidence of systematic manipulation, coercion, and attempted fraud by the plaintiffs." The judge flipped through the pages, her brow furrowing as she read. Carlos stood and addressed the court directly. We also submit evidence of verbal and physical abuse, including a recorded confession from a wedding guest and photos of the defendant's injuries sustained during that event. Juliet's face paled. She turned toward Ethan, whispering harshly, "You said no one recorded it." Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked like a man watching the last plank of a sinking ship drift away. Then came the moment that silenced the room completely, a series of social media videos played on a large screen showing the unedited footage of the wedding. The slap, the gasps, Juliet's voice screaming for my keys, and then me standing tall, trembling but defiant, saying words that had since circled the internet. This is what happens when kindness is mistaken for weakness. When the clip ended, the only sound was Juliet's ragged breathing. The judge leaned back. "I've seen enough." Her voice carried the weight of authority that could crush or cleanse. Mr. and Mrs. Hughes, this case began as a petition for incompetence. What I see instead is a pattern of calculated deceit and exploitation. The court not only dismisses your petition, but recognizes sufficient evidence to consider charges of elder financial abuse. Juliet's head snapped up. "What?" "You can't," silence the judge interrupted sharply. "You have both shamed this court and your own family." Ethan's face crumpled as if the air had been punched from his lungs. Juliet stared straight ahead, her composure finally cracking. The gavel came down once, twice like thunder. Case dismissed. The court will refer this matter to the district attorney's office for further investigation. It was over, but it didn't feel like victory. As the courtroom emptied, I sat there unable to move. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the fight, the loneliness pressed down on me. Carlos placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," he said softly. "You stood up and won." I nodded, though my chest felt hollow. Winning had never been the goal. Survival had. Outside, flashes from cameras lit up the courthouse steps. Somehow the story had spread. Reporters called out my name, their voices overlapping Mrs. Hughes. "How does it feel to win?" But I walked past them, the autumn wind tangling through my gray hair. Lucy waited by the car, her eyes glistening. "Aunt Aurora," she whispered as she hugged me tightly. "It's finally over." But as I looked out over the city skyline, I knew it wasn't. Not really. Legal battles end with signatures, but emotional wounds take longer to heal. The betrayal of a child doesn't fade, it just becomes quieter, like an old scar you stop touching because you know it will always ache. That evening, I sat on my balcony with Joseph, watching the sunset bleed into the horizon. "Do you regret anything?" he asked gently. I thought for a long moment before answering. "No," I said finally. "Regret belongs to those who never fought back." He smiled faintly. "And what about Ethan?" A soft ache rippled through me, but I didn't let it show. "He'll face his consequences. Maybe someday he'll understand that love and control are not the same thing." The wind picked up again, carrying the faint sounds of life below: children, laughing, a dog barking, a radio playing somewhere far away. I took a sip of my tea and let the warmth spread through me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel old. I didn't feel weak. I felt free. The war had ended not with revenge, but with truth, and truth, I realized, was the only inheritance worth leaving behind. 2 years have passed since the night my son tried to erase me. Time has a strange way of softening even the sharpest memories, turning pain into reflection, anger into quiet understanding. But some wounds never close entirely. They just stop bleeding. I am 70 now. The mornings arrive slower but gentler. I wake to sunlight spilling through lace curtains, the scent of coffee already brewing, and the faint hum of life returning to my apartment. It's the same home Juliet once called too large for a woman your age, yet it's never felt so perfectly sized. Every corner tells a story of survival, of love, reclaimed, of peace earned. The city outside moves on indifferent to what I've lived through. But within these walls, I've built something new, something real. The Aurora Hughes Foundation for the Protection of Seniors began as an idea on a sleepless night when I realized I wasn't the only one who had faced this kind of betrayal. With Carlos's guidance and Lucy's energy, we transformed that pain into purpose. 2 years later, we've helped hundreds of seniors regain control of their finances, report abuse, and rediscover their dignity. We have lawyers, counselors, volunteers, even a small network of social workers who visit those too frightened to ask for help. Sometimes I visit the Foundation's office, a modest space in an old building downtown, filled with sunlight and plants Joseph insists on tending. He's our vice president now, and at 72 he claims it's the most fulfilling work of his life. We're not just saving money, he says, we're saving people from despair. Lucy, now our educational director, often organizes workshops for families teaching them that love should never come with financial strings. Watching her stand at the front of a crowded room, strong and articulate, fills me with a quiet pride I never found in motherhood. Perhaps that's the miracle of chosen family. It heals the places where blood once failed. And yet, even now, Ethan's shadow lingers. He called 3 times in the past 2 years. The first time after the court ruling, his voice was full of anger. "You humiliated me," he said. "You turned the world against us." I listened in silence, knowing that nothing I said could reach the part of him that still believed he was the victim. The second time was after Juliet left him. She took their son, my grandson, and half of what little they had left. "She said I ruined her life," Ethan told me, his voice trembling. "Mom, I don't have anyone." I almost told him that he did once, that he had a mother who loved him enough to forgive anything, until forgiveness became a weapon used against her. But I stayed silent. Some truths only hurt when spoken aloud. The third call came a few months ago. His voice was weaker, then tired. "Oliver's almost 2 now," he said quietly. "You'd like him. He has your eyes." There was a pause, heavy and full of things we'd never said. "Maybe someday you could meet him." That sentence has replayed in my mind countless times. The thought of a small boy, my blood, my legacy growing up not knowing me, breaks something deep inside. But I've learned that love isn't about possession, it's about patience. I created a trust fund for Oliver, enough to pay for his education one day. He'll never know where it came from until he's old enough to understand what true love looks like, quiet, steady, expecting nothing in return. Life now is smaller, but fuller. I spend mornings tending to the community garden I helped establish behind our building. Afternoons are for foundation work or writing letters to seniors who've reached out after reading my story. Evenings I sit on the balcony where everything began, watching the sun dissolve into the horizon. The anxiety that once kept me awake at night has faded. My hands, once trembling with grief and rage, now move with calm purpose. Dr. Hernandez, my physician, told me last month that I have the blood pressure of a woman 10 years younger. I told him peace is better medicine than any pill. Occasionally I receive letters from strangers, people who watched my televised interview or read the book that followed. They tell me that my story gave them courage to leave toxic families, to say no for the first time in decades, to reclaim their own voices. Every letter is a reminder that what began as humiliation in a ballroom became a movement for healing. And still, on quiet nights, I think of Ethan. I imagine him holding Oliver, telling him bedtime stories, maybe even remembering the woman who once fought for him when no one else would. I don't hate him, not anymore. Hate is a chain, and I've already broken too many. I've come to understand something profound. Forgiveness isn't a gift to the person who hurt you. It's a release for the one who's been carrying the pain. I forgive Ethan, not because he deserves it, but because I do. Tomorrow, I'll attend a meeting with state senators to discuss new laws protecting seniors from financial abuse. Next week, the foundation will open its 3rd regional office. Life, it seems, has given me a second act. And in this act, I am no longer someone's mother, widow, or victim. I am simply Aurora Hughes, a woman who lost everything and found herself in the aftermath. The past still whispers to me sometimes, but now it sounds less like sorrow and more like wisdom. And as I sit beneath the same evening sky where I once waited for revenge, I realize that I no longer crave justice. I already have it written, not in court documents, but in the peace that comes when you finally understand your worth.